Hi, and welcome to another episode of VetsTV. I'm Jared Levinson, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Uren, a Vietnam veteran. Today's show is very special because we're honoring our Vietnam veterans as a companion program to the upcoming Maryland Public Television special coming up on May 24th, 25th, and 26th on Maryland Public Television, honoring our Vietnam veterans. This is the third segment in our program honoring our Vietnam veterans. We're honored today to be joined by Walter Rawl, who was a Navy corpsman in Vietnam, and Dr. Ed Fulton, who is the owner also of Maryland's Dominion Marina, a Vietnam veteran, and an orthopedic surgeon here in Chester, Maryland, and MPT Representative Heather Marchese will tell us a little bit about the upcoming program and also a very special event at the Maryland Fairgrounds in Timonium on Maryland LZ, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Great.
Okay, well, I want to welcome all of you and thank you for coming on the program. Walter, this segment is devoted primarily to talking about medical care for Vietnam veterans as well as folks who served in Vietnam during the war, and comparing a little bit what existed then and what existed now. Both of you are in an excellent position to assess that. What was it like being a Navy corpsman in Vietnam, and what was the role? For folks who don't know what a corpsman does, what did you do?
I was attached to India 37, a grunt outfit, Marine Corps. There were typically 2 corpsmen per platoon. However, we were always short. They were either being killed or wounded. Basically, stop the bleeding, maintain the airway, do whatever you had to do to get them out of there once they were wounded.
And what kind of training does a corpsman get?
Well, I joined the Navy because I was drafted in 1966 on my birthday, February the 4th. I didn't want to go in the Army, so I joined the Navy. Went to Great Lakes for boot camp. Went to Corps School at Great Lakes later on. I did a stint 2 or 3 weeks at the Annapolis Naval Academy. From there I ended up at Quantico, from Quantico to Lejeune, from Lejeune to Geiger, then to Cherry Point, Marine Corps bases. In December of 1967, I landed in Vietnam, in Da Nang. There were probably 100, 150 corpsmen in line to be disseminated throughout I Corps. Fortunately for me, I was probably the 7th or 8th people left. Everybody else was assigned somewhere and they were being taken away. Initially, I started with the 1st Engineer Battalion, which was a real cushy job in the rear. I had a dispensary. I lasted 10 days. They were killing corpsmen. I was then assigned to India 37, and from there it was terrible.
Okay, could you tell us, if you're comfortable speaking about that, what happened at that point?
Well, at that point, again, I was with a grunt outfit. We did sweeps, operations. The ambushes were the worst. You always waited for the pop flare for us to pop it, the elimination. I was always in dreaded fear that they would know we were there before, that they popped the flare first. If they popped the flare, they knew where we were. And it was all downhill after that. Operations, as I said, sweeps, patrols. I just became hardened, is what happens. You become part of the organization, whether it be a company type operation or platoon or whatever it may have been. You just become hardened and you do your job, and it's whatever you can do to save these Marines. Couple instances, 2 different firefights, 2 different periods of time. I had a Marine touch me on the shoulder and say, "Doc, you stay here. We'll get him." He never came back. Same scenario, different firefight. same ordeal. Sacrificed their lives to keep me alive. It was not uncommon for this to happen, whether it be the platoon and squad that I was with. I mean, corpsmen were in a unique situation. We weren't Marines, and yet we weren't Navy either, because I spent 3.5 of the 4 years with the Marine Corps. The bond was unbelievable. You just did what you had to do. Try to save these guys, get them out of there. I had a situation, we were going into Laos, and we had a tank, was our forward security. We had a tank in the rear, and my company, the sister company of India 37, was on the left flank. And a bomb exploded, 500-pound, 700-pound aerial bomb booby trap. It killed 17, 18 Marines instantly. And once that started, the firefight ensued. It was just amazing. You can't do a movie that would have been close to what we saw there and what was happening there. The number of Marines that were killed, and the number of VC and NVA that were killed. I tagged a Marine. He took a flesh wound through the shoulder. Put the tag on, bandaged him up, and that way he could get his Purple Heart. Later that day, I was on top of a tank on the rear, and they were throwing the bodies up, the dead and the wounded. And here's this same Marine who took a round, went through the upper mandible into the lower mandible, blew out some gum, blew out some teeth, and he's smiling. And I looked at him, he had another tag on his pants where he had been wounded in the leg and the calf, another flesh wound. This young kid, 17, 18-year-old, was smiling at me. And I'm debriefing him, taking the bone and the broken teeth and everything out. And he goes like this. And I said, 3 wounds is what he had. You're wounded 3 times, you're medevaced out. I said, we may not get out of here. And he's still smiling. This kid didn't weigh 120 pounds. I mean, it was example after example, the camaraderie between the Marine Corps and the corpsmen. God, I mean, the stories are all different, but they're all the same. Someone's going to die, somebody's going to live.
As these things are unfolding, we talked earlier about training. You had medical training. How about the emotional part? Is there any way, I mean, there's no way to prepare really, but as all this is happening, as you're processing these events, as they're occurring in front of you, if I can ask, what are you thinking, what are you feeling? You say you were able to steel yourself to the point that you could function and do what you need to do.
Well, I think what happens is you just do your job. You become hardened in anticipating what's going to happen. Are we going to walk into that ambush? Are they set up waiting for us during this operation? Allenbrook was one of the operations that I was on where we had probably 3 companies of Marines. It's just endless. It goes on and on. You just do a job. It's like being a carpenter. You're just doing what you're trained to do. I never became emotional until 1983 when the door opened up.
What opens the door?
I can't tell you that. All I know is the door was shut. Everything was in the closet. And one day in 1983, the door just went. From that point on, it all went downhill. I did 23 years of counseling with a BA, PTSD. I've been back to Nam, 25, 26 times. Purpose of that was to get rid of the boogeyman.
Does it help?
Yes. Yes.
How does that help to go back and revisit?
Well, one of the major fire bases I was on was a place called Hill 65. The Arizona Territory and Dodge City, which were nicknames for that specific area of operation. I've been back to 65 many, many times, and various other Hill 10, 22, 43, 41. I visited every one of those fire bases. I was in those fire bases during the war, all of '68, and they're all the same. They're all overgrown, but most of the trench lines are still there. In 2002, the first trip I made back was a organized tour, and literally the trench lines were there, sandbags were still there, but it was overgrown.
Our other guest, Dr. Ed Fulton, is also a Vietnam veteran. Dr. Fulton, could you tell us a little bit about how you arrived in Vietnam, what you did there? Maybe we can talk a little bit about the state of medical care there versus back here today.
Okay. I had done my medical school training at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. I had done an internship in general surgery at George Washington University Hospital. And at that time, they had a waiver program. If you were scheduled to go into a post-educational specialty, you didn't have to come through the draft. Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I volunteered. They said, well, would you, and this was for the Army, they said, would you like to go to Alaska or Germany and serve 3 years? Or you could be stationed in Okinawa or Vietnam or someplace like that and only serve 2. Well, I was not a very military-oriented type personality. I had the long hair and, the yuppie thing back in the late 60s. So I said, well, I'll take my chances. I'll go for 2 years. So I went down to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, did 6 weeks of basic, and they said, get on the plane, boy, you're going to Vietnam. And like the others have expressed in their segments, when that plane lands and you get off that plane, it's like 150 degrees. And you start sweating through your clothes, and you sweat for the time you're there, or you get swept away by the monsoons. Well, I went in country in Chu Lai, which is, I believe, in Tu Quoc, and they shipped me up to Quy Nhon, where I had a couple of months of a very nice dispensary, a lot of surrounding military, very little action. And the higher-ups, I guess, thought I should get exposed to something else. So I got assigned to the Anke Valley. And this was a barbed wire perimeter fire base with the wooden towers for the watch guards. We were at the foot of what was called Hong Kong Mountain, which was just tunnels for the VC and NVA to hide in. I was the CEO of both of those medical companies, the 66th Med and the 7th Med. I was the only doctor. There were no nurses. There were no trained corpsmen. There were some OJT type people that carried stretchers, but that was it. It was 24/7, 365 for me. We basically were trained in things to expect like Walt did. Without guys like Walt, I would have had nothing to do, because he did the hard part. He stabilized these guys, and they would chopper into my fire base, and I would try to stabilize them further. We didn't have any facility for keeping them, so they either were fit to go back to their unit, or they got choppered down to a field hospital, where most of them had to go, because I'd never seen things like this. I worked in inner-city emergency rooms in Baltimore and Washington, and you think you've seen it all, but no. Vietnam was unbelievable. Things you can't even imagine. And like Walt said, you can't make a movie about that. It would be censored. The wounds, as Bobby knows, the people that you treat, and the innovation of what you have to do to treat them, the book goes out the door. You do what you've got to do. You do innovative things. I remember operating on a 10-year-old Vietnamese kid who'd been out in the fields trying to gather bronze because they could sell it, and brass, and he got a live charge, and it was in his belly. And it was raining, it was monsoon season, they couldn't chopper him down to Saigon. So I had to hook up, and I'd never done surgery by myself before. I was an intern before going to Vietnam, and we just held retractors for that year. They had no anesthesia. We had a tent with lanterns, so we used ether, hooked up an IV and gave him Valium, and I opened his belly up, took his round out, sort of like a MASH story, back from Korea MASH times, and sewed him back up, and I thought, this kid's going to die because I don't know what I'm doing. But about 2 weeks later, he came back and was walking, and his family gave me a hand-carved ivory head of a Vietnamese that I treasure to this day. But the guys, unfortunately, were exposed to so many things over there, drugs being one of the most prevalent, alcohol being another. Some of the units were overrun by soldiers who just would not obey orders. One night, the MPs came and woke me up about 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "Doc, come on, you gotta go." What turned out was a brand new captain who'd been in country 2 to 3 weeks, a West Point graduate, had been shot and killed by one of his own men. And I had to take the bullet out of him for a chain of evidence. And that's one of the most memorable things I retained from Vietnam. But for 35 years, you didn't talk about it. My kids didn't know. Tell me about Walt. And Walt encouraged me, and I went back with him the second time he went to see Vietnam. I swore I'd never go back. But it's the best thing I ever did, and I've got him to thank for it. And I've gone back 10 or 12 times since then. And you ask about, what do you get out of it? Well, the dreams never go away. The fear never goes away. But you can channel it now. You can see that Vietnam is a beautiful country. The people are friendly. The food is great. It may be communist, but whatever they did after we left worked for them. And you're so happy to see a country that's doing that well, the people are doing well. It all was worth it.
In terms of the kinds of things that you could do then versus the medical care that's available today, could you talk a little bit about the advances that have been made in the things you've training?
Well, in the place where I was stationed, the base had really no medical equipment to speak of. We didn't have an x-ray machine. We just had a couple of stretchers and some instruments. So we would basically do stabilization, limb salvage, things of that sort. But when they got down to the field hospital, the medical care was superb. They had great doctors, they had dedicated great nurses, and they saved a lot of lives down there. The key was getting them there through people like Walt and people like me. You couldn't do much medical practice where I was stationed. Just didn't have the training or the equipment. But if you could save a life, you saved a life and got them to where they could rehabilitate, whether it be in country or they went back to Japan or Germany. Now, and I think Bobby probably is best equipped to state this because she was a nurse in Korea as well as Vietnam. The lesson learned from Korea was put to use just beautifully in Vietnam. The fact that they had the choppers to go in and pick up wounded, transport them, get them in clinical hands as quickly as possible once being stabilized by the corpsmen or the medics. And then they were quickly taken care of down at the better hospitals. there have been a lot more casualties, a lot more dead, had they not applied the medical experiences from, unfortunately, war creates a lot of knowledge and a lot of expertise, triage being one of them, who to save and who you got to let go. You take care of those that you can help. There's some, no matter what you do, they're not going to make it. The aftercare, after I got home, I was at Kimbrough Army Hospital at Fort Meade in Maryland. They had great guys. They had good doctors. Most of the patients were Vietnam vets that came through. I was fortunate enough to be on an orthopedic floor, though I was a general medical officer, but it inspired me to go into orthopedic surgery, and that's how I made connections to get into it. Unfortunately, at that time, the VA didn't have much to offer anybody. And to this day, they've made a lot of changes, they've made a lot of advances, they've spent a lot of money, but it's an organization that unfortunately is in disarray. The quality of care varies from state to state and hospital to hospital. The facilities are there, they just haven't organized the personnel and motivated the personnel to do their jobs entirely correctly.
What would you say along those lines? What should they do to solve those problems?
Clean house. Unfortunately, it's probably like a union. It's a seniority-oriented situation. People have a job. It's hard to get rid of bad people. So it just rolls over and over and over, incompetence on top of incompetence. You hear the politicians talk about, you've got to take care of our vets. Well, it's all political hash. They talk about the budget and all the money they're spending, but they're not cleaning up the disorganization that exists. I've applied for disability, for PTSD and Agent Orange exposure. You've got to have a strong advocate who knows what they're doing to get anywhere. And I hear in patients that come to me because they know I'm a veteran and I can help them with the paperwork, they just throw their hands up, and so many of them just quit because you can't penetrate the giant. I don't know how that's going to be rectified or if it ever will be, but the budget's there to rectify it. Somebody with a strong hand has to get in there and do it.
Let me ask you this. In your practice today or since Vietnam, what lessons did you take away that may have affected the way in which you practice medicine or look at patients?
Well, as you've heard in other segments, you're a different person when you come home. The things in life that I see Americans complain about, like the TV doesn't work, the water drips, my bed's not comfortable, that's gone. When you see what people went through in Vietnam and a lot of that third world area and how they live, you've got to appreciate what you've got in this country and stop bitching about the little stuff. And I sort of bent that over into my practice. I'll listen to everybody because I get paid to listen. But there are those that you know you can help, and there are those that just want to talk and get a pill. So deriving the personality of the patient, I think, is critical. And Vietnam, I think, helped me train to do that so I could filter out and triage my patients who are nowhere near as badly in trouble as our Vietnam vets were.
Walter, let me ask you, in the life that you've lived since Vietnam, let me ask you the same question. What lessons did you take away, and how did those lessons affect the way you view, I hate to say it, but life in general, for lack of a better way to put it, and also how you view everyday life and the things you do and the people that you relate to? It's a lot to ask, but...
You know, I don't know if I can say this. Let's just say that my experience when I came home, my father was a lifer in the Navy all through World War II. All my uncles served somewhere, Korea, had an uncle served in Korea. He eventually killed himself. But all the other uncles and family members, they survived. No one ever heard my story because I never talked about it, including my old man, who was a lifer. And again, 1983 is when I took a little trip upstairs. The door opened. I've done okay as far as surviving. I knew I had to survive, make $1, take care of the house, take care of the family, whatever. I think the terminology PTSD, or the dreams you may have, or the memories you have, they never go away. You kind of put them someplace and learn to live with them. Earlier, a little while ago, I talked about going to the fire bases. 65 was essentially home for me. No matter how many other places we were, that was headquarters. That's where we returned to. You just, again, you become hardened. You get used to, there's no tears when you're leaning over someone. You make a decision, who's going to live? Who can you work on? You know he's going to die. You take care of the one that, okay? All that is still up here. It doesn't come out like it used to be, but it's there. I'm sure Doc here, Ed, he's got the same experiences as he went through the repertoire. I think if you were anyone in combat, in a situation like my friend over here, Jay, he was a medic, we got the leftovers. We got what was left after the firefight, or during the firefight. While everybody else is shooting their guns and mortars and everything else, we're trying to keep these people alive. And it's there. I mean, I can remember many of the fellas that I either got medevaced out or died right there. You take a kid, 18, 19, 20 years old, and throw him into the fire. He's just a kid. I don't know. Like Doc, I enjoy going back. I visit the hills most of the time, the fire bases. The country's beautiful. I had a situation about 4 or 5 years ago, where we had a friend, Mr. Tang, Doc knows him very well. Him and I went to Hill 65. And we went down to get some sugar cane. That machine there, just grind it down and drink it. So it's cold. Guy walked up to me, an old man, walked up and goes, "I know you." I said, "How you know me?" He said, I remember you. You come into Dailak, which is a village right below the hill. He said, "You take care of my son. You take care of my family. Ted starved." Now he's speaking Vietnamese, but my interpreter, Mr. Tang, is one thing led to the other. He said, we had rotten, bug-infested cheesecloth that went through it to filter it out. And that was one of the highlights of being back to that area and having someone 35, 40 years later say to you, "I remember you." There was a fellow in Da Nang that he had a Marine Corps hat, but it wasn't United States Marine Corps. It was the Vietnamese Marine Corps attached to the Army, the Marine Corps, United States Marine Corps. He lost a leg. And as I walked by with a shirt that said United States, or Corpsman on the front of it, he started talking. And we went into his house, invited me in. He was missing from the knee down. The whole family came. We sat there and drank beer and talked about it. Since then, he's died. But I've got pictures of this guy. Every time I go into Da Nang, he'd be sitting on the steps. And we drink a beer and shoot the crowd. I mean, there were good things. There were some things that happened that were good and not bloody. And, you know, you carry this stuff. It never goes away. You just kind of put it somewhere.
Just to add a point to what Walt was saying and to what's been said in prior segments, nobody can talk about Vietnam and have somebody understand unless they were there. To that end, we have a group that gets together on the first Monday night of every month that are almost all Vietnam vets. And we go out and have dinner and maybe a beer because we can talk to each other and ventilate and talk about stories that you can't tell anyone else. But these guys understand. And the way we were treated when we got home, I mean, that's been 45, 50 years ago. Nobody can make up for that. But I'd like to personally thank MPT and what they're doing, as well as the local stations here, to try and resurrect and tell the real story about the Vietnam veteran. I truly appreciate that they're doing this, and it's very meaningful to us who were Vietnam veterans.
We're honored and happy to do that. I know MPT is as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank both of you gentlemen, Walter Rowell and Dr. Ed Fulton, for joining us today and sharing your stories. And we thank you for your service to our country. We can't say that enough.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Heather, you want to talk a little bit about the special coming up?
Sure.
And also Maryland LZ?
Sure. So MPT is going to be premiering its documentary of Maryland's Vietnam War stories. It's the Vietnam War as told through Maryland's Vietnam veterans. And it's told in a chronological history. It's 3 hours starting May 24th, 25th, and 26th. That will be followed in June by LZ Maryland, which is taking place at the Maryland State Fairgrounds on June 18th and 19th. And that's really a significant event to honor our Vietnam veterans and to give them the welcome home and the thank you that they so deserve. If I can add to that just a little bit, we are also doing a trip back to Vietnam, and I know you two gentlemen are familiar with this, but that will be in October. And all Vietnam veterans and families are welcome to take that trip. We hope that that's going to be part of the healing as well as the event. But we've also done a number of things that you'll see at LZ Maryland. We've been having a traveling exhibit travel throughout the state, which SunTrust and SunTrust Foundation sponsored. And that has been out there to educate the community in community centers and libraries and schools, so that people understand a little bit more about what took place, and provide a little bit of context for our Vietnam veterans and for what they experienced. There's also a great deal of work that we've been doing with the public school system in having middle schoolers and high schoolers capture oral histories of Vietnam veterans. One of the things that we learned pretty quickly on was that there were far more stories than we could possibly capture in a 3-hour documentary, and they needed to be captured and they needed to be heard. So we've been partnering with the public school system throughout the state to capture those, and those are being archived with the Maryland State Historical Society.
Great. What has been the reactions of the school folks who are involved?
They've been thrilled. This has been a really exciting opportunity for them. I think that a lot of the school's social studies teachers in particular would like to go deeper into these kinds of topics, and oral histories is a great way for them to engage students and have students engage directly with Vietnam veterans and have that firsthand opportunity for primary research, which otherwise these students are looking in books and they're maybe researching old newspaper articles. The experience, excuse me, the direct experience of speaking with somebody who's actually had that wartime experience changes the ballgame entirely, and it's been really eye-opening for these students. Yeah.
And again, for LZ Maryland, it's very easy to get there.
Very easy to get to. It's right off of the Jones Falls Expressway or 83 North. It's York Road. There's plenty of parking. Veterans are free. And we hope to see as many people there as we possibly can. We are there rain or shine. There's plenty of indoor and outdoor spaces.
Great. I think for people who attend, I think it'll be a great experience. And you'll learn a lot, and it'll be great to honor our veterans as well from the Vietnam War. It's about time.
Absolutely.
I want to thank all three of you, Ed Fulton, Walter Rao, and Heather Marchese from Maryland Public Television for joining us today. And I want to thank Maryland Public Television for inviting us
Thank
to
you
be
for
part
having
of
us.
this great opportunity to honor our Vietnam veterans and finally welcome them home in a proper fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your service to our nation.
Thank you.
That concludes this segment of VetsTV. On behalf of my co-host Bill Uren, this is Jared Levinson, and I'd like to thank you for watching this segment of VetsTV. I hope to see you again on VetsTV on MCTV Channel 15 in just a minute.